Good morning. Welcome back, if you're back. Thanks for coming. It's great to see everybody, and excited to receive even more folks back from serving our country and vacations in the future as the fall draws near. So, last week we did a one-off message on reflections, which was a little bit of my takeaway from my time away with my family on vacation, and attempting to kind of showcase that you can't vacate from God. You shouldn't take vacation from His presence or from an understanding of Him, even though you might physically be in a space where the responsibilities are low, but you would be in a space where your understanding of God might be high. And we talked about the commitment, and we talked about consistency, and we talked about being blessings. Because we are blessed, that we would bless one another. So I hope that in that space, what I really wanted to convey was some things that I feel like God is doing in me, but also something that I think that He wants to bring us into. A commitment to the things that we're going to plan and talk about for the future, and that we would let our yes be yes. The oath that we don't have to take, because exactly who we are and what we speak of speaks of Jesus. Kim, I really like the song choices this morning. It was just a nice drawing in of, focusing in on who He is. And again, sometimes all of us always need that reminder, that pointing into that space. We had I thought, a really great leadership meeting last week. We discussed some pretty substantial things as it relates to the next phase of our church. As you know, we've been trying to kind of maintain the course that God is calling us to, and in an attempt to not get ahead of where He would have us be overly zealous, overly eager, and then spin around and wonder why He's not there. But in that sense, we've been trying to be listeners, we've been trying to be learners, just even thinking about your question of what do we do now that we have a consistency out there in the garden. What's going to happen with that? Looking at that as like a deposit that God has given to us, and how will we care for it? So definitely something we should be praying through, thinking through, because we know that it's more than just a garden, right? We know that God's doing something in that, and God's going to call some of you to create something like a garden here, and we're going to want to get behind that and see how God's going to carry it through. But through all of that, I think we need to actually start making some practical steps towards, I don't even want to say getting back to normal. I don't know what your normal was, so take that or leave it. I don't know. But what I'm asking for is God to give us a new sense of what we're going to be about. A new normal, His normal. If He's there, there's going to be nothing normal about it, right? I mean, it's His super normal. Whatever His super normal is for us is really what we want to be after. But we do need to have something that people can rely on, that they can kind of plan around, and they can know that we're making strides to create ministry areas that go beyond just Sunday morning, ultimately. How much and how often and who will be leading those things, I mean, that's TBD, right? That's still to be determined. And one thing that I'm trying to stay really aware of is that the things, I can even remember when Cynthia said this when we were in the search process, which was, we have capable and viable people right here in our midst that could do things. Let's not relegate it off to someone else. And at that point it was like the pastor doing all the work, when we have people here in our midst that could do some things. And so I'm not going to allow us as a body to spin up more things than we have people that want to care for them. Right? Because then all of a sudden it's just creating busy work for some people. And so that means that not only do I need to have my antenna up to see what God wants us to do, but I'm hoping the same for you. That you might hear from God and say, Jason, I really feel like God's leading me to do this in this body. What would that look like? I want to give you full permission and full opportunity to come up to me or anybody on the leadership team. Bob, Michael, Larry, who's not here today, but come on up to us, and if you have things that you want to discuss and you would say, could we ever do this here? I mean, at some point in time, somebody said, could we ever put a garden out there in that open field? And look at what it allowed for, right? I feel like God is going to plant those secret desires and seeds in you, and we want to rally around you. But if we don't hear from you, it's really hard to do that. So don't be afraid to do that. Now, that being said, I want to propose this morning kind of like a new schedule, a new Sunday morning structure for us that I hope will give us the space to kind of come back online with certain types of ministries. But I want to do so not just by throwing up a slide on there and say, here's what it's going to be. What I'd really like to do is kind of house it in Scripture. Because what we're going to be doing, for many, might be brand new, something that you've never seen done in a church setting, at least in this particular way, which that excites me, because I'm always looking for something that God might be doing something afresh and new in us with traditional understandings, but like, you know, the new wine and the new wineskins kind of a thing. So I'm very excited about that. This word discourse is today's theme. If it carries on through today, I don't know, but at least for today, this is the theme for what I want to talk about. Discourse is a very interesting word. I have a definition up here or two in case you don't know what the word means. The true term, discourse, is literally a verbal interchange of ideas. This is different than dialogue. This is different than communication. This is different than, honestly, preaching, where one person speaks and a bunch of people listen. This is an interchange of ideas. You are kind of getting an interchange of ideas in me as I've kind of wrestled through the Word throughout the week, and I come and I deliver something. This is an oration. This is a communication. Some people are better orators than others. Doesn't mean that the content of what you're trying to communicate is bad. It just means that some people might not be able to convey it most really efficiently. But when you take away that monologue, if you will, which is kind of what I'm giving you, you open yourself up to a discourse, which is a conversation around a certain theme or a certain topic. Another way you can say this is it's a linguistics unit. So you can actually take courses in college and university on discourse, right? You could engage yourself in a higher learning of that. But the conversation piece is really what I want us to take away. Conversation. Admittedly, unless you and I talk after the sermon or after Sunday and we engage on the topic, we're not really ever having a conversation about the themes and the ideas expressed inside the sermon series. And I think that that's systematically kind of a poor performance in church. Problem is, it's the history and legacy of what church has been forever, right? The paid person stands up here to deliver the message that at some level might be more important than anything you would deliver. That's kind of been the understanding of how church goes. It's honestly some of the things that people have left the church over, because there has been no value given towards the conversation, towards just because that person said that doesn't mean I actually believe it or agree with it. How do we then engage around that? Listen, Jesus was not always loved and welcomed for what he was saying. As a matter of fact, on the other side of it was most hated for what he was saying. He didn't shy away. He didn't give his message and then drop the mic and walk out and get in the van and fly off. Instead, there's so many spaces in Scripture where we see he was engaged in discourse. He would come together with the people that he was talking with and walking with, and he would dialogue and have conversation in an attempt to bring learning and understanding. That is particularly absent in not only our church, but many churches. It baffles me, to be honest. And listen, I love what I do, and I think it is a sacred thing that God allows for me to be a part of. And I enjoy leading in this way, and I hope that you enjoy that the messages that are coming out of who I am and who we all represent together. But this idea of Jesus not doing it this way has kind of always haunted me a little bit. We have the Sermon on the Mount. We have certain times in Jesus' ministry where he would essentially stand a podium up, grab a microphone and say, hey, I need you to understand this information here. Absorb it. But the majority of what Jesus was doing was discourse. Let's go through a couple that we know that we've actually talked about here. Here's John 9:1-2. Right? Again, a retelling We've talked about this story many times through different perspectives. Now I want you to look at John 9 through the lens of discourse. In John 9, 1 and 2, as he went along, it says, Jesus saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? If you remember the story in long form, as Jesus was there with his disciples, this is the scene where he put the mud from the spit of his own mouth and wiped it on the man's eyes and said, go to this one pool of water. When you get there, wash your face and you will be seen. And of course he did. He received his vision that very day. And that day he was also engaged in tribunal after tribunal from the Pharisees. And his parents came and kind of agreed that he was their son, but kind of didn't go with him because they didn't want to be cast out. And at the end of the day, this young man, which was supposed to be the greatest day of his life, the day that he had longed for, to have vision, to see when he had been blind his entire life, is now cast out of a society that is his care and support. And in that beautiful space, Jesus meets him. That all happens because Jesus stopped long enough at this man's corner, at this man's thoroughfare where he would sit day after day and be brought there by family members to beg and ask for money and for food. It all started because Jesus and his disciples engaged in discourse around this young man. So many ways this could have happened differently. From a distance, Jesus could have just zapped him his sight if he wanted to. Easy enough for him to do. He'd done that before, remember? With the centurion's servant. And he came in and said, listen, you don't even have to come to my house. Just say it from where you are and I know it will happen. So we know Jesus can do it that way. But in this instance, he did not. He also could have used this young man as a teaching device. And instead of engaging in conversation with him, could have talked about him, right? But it did not happen that way either. He came into his life. He took his own saliva and put it on his face. Such an intimate moment. I know we might feel it's a little grotesque, but in that space, is there anything more intimate? And it came out of discourse. It came out of conversation. It came out about the rabbi being Jesus, but the disciples didn't know the answer to the question they were asking him. They weren't trying to quiz him and catch him in an error. They just needed to know what Jesus thought. And rather than just tell them, he included them in this conversation. And they were all there, right? When they went, and the young man went and he received his sight, they were all there watching as the day turned terrible for him. Very bad day at this point, once he received his sight. So discourse doesn't always end in pure joy and adulation. Sometimes there is pain in discourse. Like in this one. Matthew 19. The rich young ruler. When they're in a conversation, the young ruler in Matthew 19 runs up to Jesus because he has a burning question inside of him, and that is, what do I need to do to inherit eternal life? Of course, Jesus, in his infinite wisdom, his perfect wisdom, answered his question with another question. Why do you always ask me about the things when it is the who? And then they have a conversation. Jesus gave him the answer that he didn't know he needed, but he gave him the answer, but then continued to dialogue. For those of us that are thick-headed, me included, that don't always get what Jesus is trying to communicate, guess what? He doesn't give up on us. He doesn't just leave it at that and say, well, you didn't get what I was trying to say, so I'm out of here. If that was the case, the disciples would have been long gone. So many times they had no idea what Jesus was talking about. But because they were included in discourse, they stayed. Because they were allowed to be a part of the conversation, they stayed. It's honestly more amazing to me that people who don't involve themselves in discussion and in discourse in the church stay that long. Because if these disciples were never allowed to engage Jesus and say, I don't get that, or mess up and try it again, they wouldn't have made it. The church, communication, if we're invested in who Jesus is, and we are the bride of Christ at the church, discourse is at the center of everything we do. So you know how this story goes, right? Has the conversation with the rich young ruler, and in the end he asks the rich young ruler to give up everything he has, to sell his possessions and give it to the poor, and then come and follow me, Jesus said. That's some heavy discourse. Too heavy, in fact, for the rich young ruler. Because he couldn't go. because he had great wealth, because he had spent so much of his life identifying with all the things that he was able to acquire and all the things he was able to accomplish. He couldn't leave that off to the side of the road in order to go and follow the one who was calling him. This discourse, by the way, didn't end well for the rich ruler. It ended in pain and sorrow. And the very fact that Jesus didn't run after him and say, wait, let me try this again. You didn't get what I was trying to say. I don't think you know what decision you're making right now. You need to just rethink this whole thing. Let's start over. No, he let him go. He let him go. Just like he lets those of us go that don't want it. You won't find a passage in the Bible where Jesus has got someone's hand behind their back telling them to say he's the Lord, say he's Messiah. Tell them, say it out loud, I'm the coming king. No, it doesn't exist. Why? Because that's not how our God operates. We have the ability in discourse to A, not understand and still be pursued, and to B, rejected and to still be pursued. It's because it's a conversation. It's a relationship. It's not a, if you do this, then I do this type of thing. The further discourse of this passage, by the way, is when the disciples, who, by the way, knew how amazing this young man was. He knew how amazing this young man was. And then he walks off, in anger and defeat. And the disciples come running up to Jesus and they basically say, if this guy can't get into heaven, how are we ever going to get in? We've given up everything to follow you. See, even Jesus allowed for that. He could have said, this is none of your business. This was something I called this young man to. I'm not calling everyone to this. It was this young man I was calling. Instead, he engaged into conversation with the disciples to let them know, don't be worried. For sure, everything you have given up in this world will be returned to you 100-fold in heaven. Out of that discourse comes reassurance and learning and understanding. Even though one gets pain, the other gets reassurance. Discourse. This is probably my favorite discourse story that we've talked about this year. When Jesus reached the spot in Luke 19, he looked up and he said to this man, a short-statured man, scrambling up a tree, Zacchaeus, he said, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. So Zacchaeus came down at once, and he welcomed him. Gladly, it says. A little backstory, Zacchaeus is not a well-liked individual. He's a tax collector, chief tax collector, which means he's the meanest of mean. The one that nobody really wanted to hang out with. Had a short man's complex. Scrambled up a tree because something about Jesus he wanted to see. Had no idea by going up in the tree and exposing himself that way, Jesus was going to invite himself over for dinner. Kind of like a hospitality faux pas to invite yourself over to somebody else's house. I think Jesus passed right through that. Because remember, Jesus is eating food that the world doesn't know about, right? He's eating the food of the Father. He's on a different mission. This is not about how he can get sustenance on a daily basis. This is about Zacchaeus. And you don't go over someone's house if you're not going to discourse. If you're not going to have a relationship and have communication and communion around the table. This is full of discourse. As a matter of fact, as a result of the interchange of ideas between Jesus and Zacchaeus, Zacchaeus came out of his house and proclaimed, I'm going to give back 40%, over 40% plus everything I owe people that I've taken money from. And those around him said, surely today the Lord has come to this man's house. Not to give a lecture, not to give a sermon, but to have a conversation, dialogue, an interchange of ideas. Last one before we get to the main passage. This one we did recently. This is the woman at the well, John 4. Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. I think that's an interesting point, right? A, it kind of shows his humanity. He's tired. But when you sit down, generally you're going to sit down and have conversation, as opposed to standing up and having a conversation, which is always an awkward thing to do. Unless you're on the go and you don't have time to really have a nice long conversation. You sit down. It was about noon, and when the Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, will you give me a drink? John 4. Jesus engages her in Discourse right away. She would probably not have talked to him at all had he not reached out to her first. She wasn't supposed to be there at that time of the day, and she definitely wasn't supposed to be talking to Jesus. Discourse gives us entrance in spaces where we probably don't deserve it, but we get it. Jesus allows us to dialogue with the Heavenly Father. Think about that just for a second. The God who spins galaxies with his left hand, so to speak, is allowed to engage us, and we are allowed to be in conversation with him. John 17, right? Jesus says, may they be in us, God, Father, like you are in me and I am in you, the great dance. May they be invited into a beautiful discourse. I could keep going for hours, honestly. I was trying to find a story with Jesus that didn't involve discourse. That was really challenging, right? There's only a couple. Now that takes us to the passage that I want to focus on. Luke 24. It's a beautiful chapter. It's the last chapter of Luke. It ends in a really, kind of ends where Acts 1 and 2 take off. Where Jesus is coming back from the dead. His resurrected body is appearing, starting to appear to disciples, to relations, to friends, other outer-tiered disciples. Beginning in verse 1, Luke 24, on the first day of the week, very early in the morning, the women took the spices they had prepared and went to the tomb. This was a ceremonial thing. They were going to try to make the tomb obviously smell better. It wasn't something that would happen normally. They found the stone was rolled away, did not expect that, from the tomb, and when they entered, they did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. While they were wondering about this, suddenly two men in clothes that gleamed like lightning were beside them. In their fright, the women bowed down with their faces. But the men said to them, why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here. He has risen. So this is the telling. These are the first individuals that were told, these women, by the way, given this beautiful, earth-shattering message. It was bequeathed, if you will. It was given. It was donated to them. They were the first ones to know that Jesus was no longer dead. Soon to follow after that was Peter coming in and taking a look at the linens. Just imagine him like, what is going on? He doesn't come in. He comes in like a bull in the china closet, pushes everybody aside, wants to see where Jesus' body was and what is going on right now. Where is Jesus? What is he doing? If you think about Jesus coming out of the grave, if you were writing a movie scene, what's the first thing you would have Jesus do? I mean, essentially, easy enough to just stand outside the tomb and say, look, here I am. I told you. I got this. Right? The prophecy foretold it. I've been telling you this whole time. Now do you get it? I'm resurrected. But no, he did not do that. Would he go to his closest friends to reveal himself first? No. I would. Want to go tell the people that love me the most, want to let them know I'm back, we're good, we have a new plan, a new goal, a new vision. Nope. Instead, Jesus finds himself on the road to Emmaus. Verse 13. Now that same day, two of them, they don't even get names, two disciples, we don't know which two necessarily, were going to see a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened. As they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them, but they were kept from recognizing him. He asked them, what are you discussing together as you walk along? This verse. What are you discussing together as you walk along? Did Jesus out of the tomb go see his mother? Did he go see his best friends? Did he go see disciples? Did he go to the important places of the communities and the cities to spotlight that he was correct, that God foretold this, and I told you so, Pharisees? Does he go into the temple to show that he in fact is the Messiah, the coming one? No! He finds two unnamed disciples for discourse. Because it's what he loves. He pushed aside all those other things, and the first scene back out of the grave is he finds two men walking along having a conversation. He slides on in and says, can I have part of this conversation? I mean, that should baffle us. Or only solidify the fact that Jesus wants a relationship, he wants to be a part of our lives, and he wants to know what we're thinking. He doesn't want us to be robots, just assuming that everything that this person, me, or anybody else like this person says is always true, 100% true, and you can't question it, and you can't have any kind of dialogue around it. No. That would be going against what Jesus wants. He doesn't even reveal himself to be Jesus in this space. Maybe because he would blow them away, right? That's part of it. But I think the other part of it is he didn't want to ruin the discussion. Because as soon as he's revealed who he is, well, discussion's over now. Can't have it. He loves discussion so much. What do they talk about then? If you keep going in the passage. Jesus says in 17 again, what are you discussing together as you walk along? They stood still, their faces downcast. This is so funny. One of them, named Cleopas, says, are you only a visitor to Jerusalem and do not know anything that's happened here in the last 3 days? In other words, are you so dull to not know what everyone here is discussing? And then they begin to tell him about this guy named Jesus, who's a prophet, and he come to save the world, apparently, and now he's gone. They'd hoped that he would be the coming king, the one. And they talk about how these women were there. They went to the tomb. Jesus wasn't there. I mean, the irony of this should not be lost on any of us, right? That they're having this discussion, telling Jesus all about what is happening while he's with them in discussion. And then I think Jesus can take no more. And he says, how foolish you are, and how slow to have heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Christ have to suffer these things and then enter his glory? And then beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures. If discourse is so important to Jesus, if conversation and engaging, interchanging ideas and wanting to know what you're thinking, giving him to tell you what he's thinking is so valuable to his time on earth, then we best as a church make sure that it's evident in what we're doing. And again, I come back to what I said at the beginning. It's not particularly part of our ministry set at this moment. When you started your search for a pastor, it probably wasn't really even in your set of ideas that you would hire somebody that has a full-time job that's not going to live in the parsonage and not kind of come in under traditional means. And to be quite honest, when I engaged you at first with that idea, I had my doubts as to whether you would go for it. But you allowed me to discuss, and we had discourse around how it could work. It wasn't just imposed upon you and say, this is how it's going to be. No, you allowed me into your life based on a conversation, based on relationship. I would like to think that the way we go forward will be similar. So, take a break from the message to kind of give out what I think is a possible proposed Sunday schedule for the fall. One of the things I don't want to discount is that not everybody wants discourse, by the way. Especially if you're new to a place, the last thing you want to do is have an intimate conversation with somebody. You might just be coming because, hey, I saw this church, there's some really great stuff going on outside, I want to step on inside and see. I never want to impose discourse. Especially in a setting like this, where people come in with an understanding that this is traditionally how church goes. If all of a sudden you start asking them questions in the middle of a sermon, they might get a little put out. Because even myself, are times when I come to spaces I may not be particularly open to wanting to engage in a dialogue or want to give myself to a question and answer time. So I would hope that we could keep and maintain what is happening here on a Sunday morning in a similar manner. What I'd like to do is I'd like to think about what we do on Sunday mornings starting in late September, as three pieces. Three distinct pieces, but kind of all together as one, to be honest. My hope is that every one of us would engage all three parts of this on a Sunday morning, not just one or two, or pick the first one and the bottom one. I would hope that you would stay for the whole thing. First, it would be 10:15. So that would be a departure from the 10:45 schedule that we currently have. We'd be starting a half an hour earlier. For us to be able to add some things on a Sunday morning, we've all talked about how it's particularly important that we still get out in a time where people can get lunch, children can get fed, nap times, all that kind of stuff can still happen. We don't want to kind of keep everybody here for an extended period in the afternoon. But we start at 10:45, which is pretty much a luxury. I mean, I was going to church at 8 o'clock when I was growing up as a kid. First service was 8, and then second service after that. So 10:45 was amazing. But if we can back our schedule up about a half an hour, we can start worship and prayer at 10:15, which may or may not take the same shape and form that it has been over the past couple of months. It may adapt a little bit to something like this. It may be more of a welcoming thing and a gathering thing and a preparation thing. It's not as if it's not that now, but who knows what Kim and crew will kind of do in that space. We'll be dialoguing about how that could change. And then at 10:45, the message series would begin. In other words, what I'm doing right now. The caution there is that you don't just say, I'm going to skip out on this one, but I'm going to come to these two, right? I always struggle that there's this understanding that this part of the worship service is the most important part, really. I think that prayer and that opportunity to worship is so important, so primary, and it comes with singing, and sometimes people like that or don't like that, but Kim and everybody, they know we don't have to sing, but we can come and be drawn into who Christ is. So we would do that for the first half hour, then I would speak. Generally my time is about a half an hour. You'll notice there that we're going to try to ramp up the nursery and make the nursery available again. Cynthia and still looking for some others to come and kind of, validate that they'd like to be a part of that. Keep in mind that for me, it's always a goal that those that are involved in volunteering aren't on a permanent volunteering island that they never get to come off of and engage, in this. We would really like for Cynthia not to be back there every Sunday, as I know she would not as well. But our heart with the nursery, I love Cynthia's heart, is again, I don't want to just talk to them about God, I want them to meet God in the nursery. That's awesome. It's not just babysitting. I mean, it's going to be helpful, no doubt. But is there a way that our children 5 years and younger, if that's who goes in the nursery, because of Cynthia and her team and her ministry, would meet God in there? That would be beautiful. I love that from the start. So it would be one of those things where after worship, I would come up or somebody would come up and would dismiss the children that want to go to nursery, give you the opportunity to take them into the nursery at that point. And then for those that are coming to traditional service and just wanted to be here for an hour plus, at that time, probably right around 11:10 in the morning, church will be quote unquote over. And then we will move into what I'll call discourse groups. It may not be called Discourse forever, but I kind of liked it. It had to match where I was going. To me, right off the bat, it's telling you this is what you're going to do. It's not another half an hour of sitting and someone's going to lecture. It is a discourse. And it will be housed in a way where there will be lots of conversation. And again, nursery will be available for that as well. So the cool part about this, and Sarah, thanks for helping me put this together, by the way. The cool part about this is I love the way that nursery is not the whole entire time. Right? So anybody working in the nursery, or if we bring up other ministries that happen simultaneously, they will never close in on the prayer and worship, right? That will be a part. You will be a part of this. We want you to be there. And if you're serving that day particularly, you'll probably be asked to serve from 10:45 all the way through the end of the discourse groups for those that wanted to keep their children in that space. And again, if there's nobody that shows up for nursery, then we're great. Children-wise. If there's an adult that doesn't show up, we've got a problem. But if there's children that aren't going in, it's okay. We'll be prepared. We'll be consistent and committed to doing it should somebody show up. And if the worker gets a free day because there's no kids there, awesome. Then they still get to come right back into the message series, and they're part of a discourse group. Now, let's talk about these discourse groups. They will be, at least we're going to try this for the first fall quarter. They will be a reaction to what we just engaged in previously in both the prayer and worship and also the message. Because what I really hope for is that whatever is said here, that it doesn't just end with a couple of head nods and a couple of notes on a piece of paper, and then you drive home and then it just dissipates and it means nothing, you know. My hope is that anything that God's doing in us, whether it's from someone talking in the prayer time, giving a short little message like Carl and Sarah and Nick is doing and Michael has done, like those times are great too, right? Those are all part of this whole service. That afterwards we would go into these discourse groups and we would be facilitated to engage it. Probably how it will happen is I will write a few thoughtful, hopefully thought-provoking questions, bless you, that come out of the message, that you might continue to dialogue about it. It's also a space to raise your hand and say, I kind of didn't understand all that. You know, I lost Jason there at this one point. You know, we all dialogue around that space and again, seek for knowledge. What happens when Jesus engages us in discourse, right? There is sometimes confusion that is brought into understanding. There is pain that hopefully can be ministered to. These discourse groups will be kind of partly given over to reaction to the message, but also partly towards what's the practicality of what we can do next because we've heard this. How can we put this into motion this week? And then a time of prayer for one another. So that's still being written. I'm still trying to put something like that together. And by the way, we're hoping to have discourse groups that will happen for adults and then discourse groups that will happen for students. So that way, again, the student one would be a reaction as well to the message or be part of that. It's important to a lot of us, as we've talked in the leadership team, that students, right, those in elementary, on up middle school, high school especially, be a part of this gathering and not kind of get hived off for their own gathering, just something that is attuned to them. I mean, we might get to a space where maybe that's just not possible and we have to make a move, but my hope is that we're all hearing the same thing, so then we're all dialoguing about the same thing throughout the week. So this is the hope, that we can get to this space. Now, what does this mean in here? We need some nursery workers. If we're going to put nursery together so we can kind of have that, for the adults can have that time to dialogue without some of the distractions, if that's how you want to go, we need some nursery workers. You can either see Cynthia or you can see me, and you can kind of raise your hand and say, hey, I'm good for 1 week a month or something like that. That's really all I hope you would have to do is 1 week a month, not more than that. And then we also need some people that might facilitate discourse groups. If you would consider yourself somebody that's kind of good at getting a group together and generating discussion and asking good questions and keeping time and all that kind of stuff, then I'd love to ask you to consider being a discourse group leader. Again, not like a monthly, quarterly commitment, but maybe, not like a whole month commitment. Maybe once a month you'll lead it, or twice a month you'll lead the discourse group. And I'm actually going to do kind of like a mini training on being a facilitator. Because I think that's going to be really important for all of us, because I don't want to create something that's manipulated by one or two people all the time. I want this to be something where we all get to dialogue, and it takes a little bit of an art form to get people talking and helping them. So if you're worried, like, I'd love to be a facilitator, but I don't know what you would exactly want me to do, I'll put a class together and we'll kind of go over some of that. I want to be really consistent and committed with that and effective, so that way people that are coming in new may be a little hesitant about jumping into a discourse group, but once they're there, they feel like they've been heard and a part of it. That's really important. Because that's what everything Jesus was doing. The Samaritan woman, the rich young ruler, the young man born blind, he was bringing them into a greater community, bringing them into a greater understanding of who he was. And our goal should be the same. The discourse group should help us know Jesus more. Should help us dig deeper and go further in our relationship with him. Not some obligatory class because the church is offering it, I have to go. That would be farthest from the thing that I would want. So if you're one of those two people in this life, nursery or a facilitator, then I would love to engage you. Please come find me, and I'll be communicating probably through Facebook. Kim will say, hey, there's going to be a facilitator's class on such and such a date after church or whatever. If you're interested, stick around, things like that. I do know, practically speaking, that if you're going to be in the nursery, there's probably some paperwork that you have to fill out, but we can get that stuff for you there just to make sure we have all of everybody's cared for and has the right clearances. At the risk of asking a question in the middle of the sermon, does anybody have a question about this? Any thoughts? Any refinement?
Jason, we also talked about the possibility for people who are attending it as
Yes, that's right. Jim brought that up. For those that are still a little hesitant about returning back, for those of you that are watching right now, we do want to be able to offer an online discourse group. So the only thing about that, though, is I want the online discourse group to be all online, not try to hybrid it. I think it just makes it easier for the people that are in a room together to not have to consistently worry about if you can hear me or see that, that kind of thing. So we'll have an in-person discourse group, and we'll have an online discourse group for those that want to be engaged but can't be here for various reasons. Thanks.
The other thing was, as the discussion groups between discourse groups continue, if they get to a point where they really have to feed back to you, that's a natural thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm again, part of the facilitator training will be, I would love to hear what people are thinking about. Maybe sometimes I'll be in the discourse group, maybe sometimes I won't be. I would just love to know, this is a way for me to get, I think, really quality feedback, and a way for you to give it in a way that's not like, I can't believe I have to tell the pastor this. That's the point, right? It allows me accountability. And it keeps me kind of, on the straight and narrow in what I'm communicating. So I really like that. Now, I might not bend to your will, but I hopefully, because what I'm giving is what I feel like is the Word of God. But if there's some pushback on that, then discourse can happen. I've talked to some pastor friends of mine, and they said, this seems pretty gutsy, right? I said this last week. Seems pretty gutsy that you allow people to feed back your messages. But I think those that go unchecked are foolish. I think those that think that they have all the answers and everything without having anybody being able to come back and question are foolish. Tim?
In that same thread, so many of us are hearing about people who are famous Christians who are deconstructing their faith. And a lot of it is, I see two reasons. One is because they're really not connected to a church group that has good teaching and that kind of thing. There's been a lot of yeses in their lives and whatever. But I think also the freedom to have a discussion and say, I'm not so sure I believe this, or I am struggling with this issue, is an anti-deconstruction.
Sure enough.
Because within a group like this, we will be able to construct together what we can accept, what we're struggling with, how we can answer those things. Midweek, we can say, wait a minute, I'm not sure what I said was right, but I'll go back to the group and we can discuss some more. So I think this is a good growth option for people if they want to take advantage of it. And I'm thankful that we have the freedom in this church to say things that are hard to say, and we're not shut out because of them. So I think this is a good anti-deconstruction.
I mean, it's a far cry from the Sunday school classes that I was a part of, where it was just another thing, another opportunity for learning, but still also another opportunity to not respond. Think about how much. I mean, listen, this Christian life is like, it should be like a breathing, right? There's an inhale and then there's an exhale. And I often think that so much of what happens on a Sunday morning is just simply like inhaling, but no opportunity to exhale. And in your own life, if all you did was inhale, you would die, right? You have to be able to exhale out. You have to be able to respond. And so in a sense, we're hopefully saying we're a living and breathing church, because we're allowing for those two things to occur. We can inhale the information, we can inhale the worship, we can be a part of communication and conversations, but then we're also on the same day given the opportunity to exhale out. Even to confirm, right? Even to confirm, I love it when people come up to me and say things like, Jason, that was just the message I needed to hear. That's confirming in me that what I'm hearing from God was the thing that I was supposed to do, because you needed it, or I needed it. Those discourse groups should be options and opportunities to confirm and affirm one another. And if someone can say they're struggling for time for prayer, they should be fluid enough to say, hey, sometimes Sunday school has such an agenda that you have to bypass other people just to get through your Sunday school class. This will not be structured that way. If somebody's having a particularly challenging day or something's on them and weighing them down, facilitators will just say, let's just pray. We'll just take this thing that we're talking about, put it on the shelf for a minute. This is what God's brought us here. This is what we're going to deal with. Honestly, this has been going on for years in youth ministry, by the way. This is how youth ministry works. Every single event that I've ever been to has a speaker, and then after the speaker, worship speaker, and then afterwards there's small group time right away. And that gives students the opportunity to engage with what they just heard. And things happen so quickly in the spiritual life of a child and a young person, right? They make decisions and they make movements, and it seems like you can see things happening. With adults, it's so slow sometimes. Things take forever to make changes, you know? Maybe it's because we don't allow adults small group opportunities to discourse. I'm hoping that that's true, that by doing this, we'll all see our faith and our knowledge in Christ and in the Scriptures grow through this. And again, we're going to do it through probably, I think we're going to do it the last week of September, last weekend of September, we'll turn this on. We're going to have a baptismal prior to that. I know we have a couple people here that have raised their hand and want to do that. And then we'll start the new structure. Hopefully we have enough people to staff some of this stuff, but more information on that. Michael, would you help me hand out the communion elements? So I wasn't going to do communion today, or we're not scheduled to do communion today. And I sent Kim a text last minute this morning and said, do you think you could set up communion? Because I would like to do it. And so thank you, Renee, for putting that together and making it happen. The end of this passage, it would be impossible for me to read this with you and not take communion because of the beauty of it. So again, Jesus is engaging in discourse with these two disciples on the road to Emmaus. And he shadowed himself in a certain way. In a way that these two men, who probably had spent the majority of the last 3 years of their life focusing on Jesus, were walking right next to him and didn't recognize him and didn't see him at all. For whatever reason he did that, I can't know. It doesn't say why. But if we keep reading in the scripture, it says in verse 28, so again, Jesus comes alongside of them. He asks them what they're talking about. They say, are you so dull that you don't know that we're talking about this guy Jesus? And he was a prophet. They didn't even know he was the Lord. And we think he's never coming back. And then he kind of chides them a little bit and says, how could you be so foolish? It's been prophesied forever that this would happen. You should know that this is how it was going to go down. You should not be in any confused state. And so because of that, he took the time to go from Moses through all the prophets to basically give them a recap of how we got to this moment in time, Jesus is saying. And then at the end of that conversation, at the end of that discourse, the road split. And the two men were going to go to the village, and it appeared that Jesus, it says, was going to keep going on his own. But they did not let him. Jesus acted as if he was going to go farther, but they strongly urged him, stay with us, for it's nearly evening. The day is almost over. By the way, you don't ask somebody to stay with you if for like the last 3 or 4 hours they've been lecturing you. Nobody wants a lecturer to stay and hang out. There must have been something in the way that Jesus was engaging them that they did not want to let him go. They didn't even know it was Jesus. They just thought it was this really great guy that has all these answers. He knows something. We need to hold on to him, right? So even in the state where they didn't think it was the Messiah, the discourse created community. They didn't want to let him go. And so they said, stay another night, and he did. Then verse 30. By the way, there's certain passages in the scriptures that pastors kind of always go to because they're communion passages. There's like 5, 6, 7 of them throughout the New Testament. This is one that nobody ever goes to. But they should. It's kind of because it wasn't officially spoken of as a communion, but it was sitting around a table and they were breaking bread together. This is so cool. Look at this. Verse 30. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, he gave thanks, and he broke it, and he began to give it to them. Then their eyes were opened and they recognized him. So cool, man. So cool. So cool, because as he was there talking about all these things, their state of wonder as to who this man is. How does he know all this stuff? They break the bread and it's Jesus. Right like that. Similar to when Peter went back to fishing in John chapter 21 because he didn't think Jesus was ever coming back. And as he stands at the edge of the shore, Jesus says, hey, have you caught anything, my friends? And all of a sudden he realizes it's Jesus. Communion, while sometimes the space to reflect and remember, can also be the space that takes the blinders from our faces and helps us to see Jesus. Bless you. I never, ever really looked at communion in that way, to be honest with you. It was always just something I had to do. I never thought that by doing this thing, by the breaking of the bread, that when I do it, I'll see Jesus. I won't see church. I won't see Sunday morning. I'll see Jesus. Their eyes were open, they recognized him, and he had disappeared from their sight. Man, I have to think at that point they were like, what did we, wait, no, I just saw you. My mind goes right to Peter's denial, right? And the third time by the campfire, someone comes up and says, no, you're with him. I recognize you. You have the accent. He falls to his knees and he says, I don't know you, man. He wasn't lying. He's having the same moment that these two guys are just having right now as soon as Jesus disappears. He's gone. And I missed every opportunity. Why didn't I take more advantage of the time that we were walking on the road to Emmaus? I could have asked this, and I got to know what he thinks about this, but now he's gone. But the discourse continues. Thanks to the Spirit who brings us in to clear our vision that we might see Christ, who points to the Father who gives us His Spirit. When you have communion this morning, don't just take something that should taste like bread but isn't, or a little bit of juice in a warm little cup. Instead, have a dialogue with Jesus. Discourse. So let's take out the bread. And let's have a dialogue about this. This represents the body of Jesus Christ, who died for you, who is your advocate, who gives you access, even though you don't deserve it. Last night, my brother's band was in town. He played at the Ardmore Street Fair. He was the headlining band. He's a wonderful musician, a great brother. Every time I go to his concerts, he does this really cool thing for me. He calls me over, or his manager does, and he puts this bracelet on my hand that says artist. Now, with this bracelet, I can do anything I want. I can go into anywhere I want. I can open any door I want. I can walk up on stage and play the drums if I wanted to. Why? Because I'm an artist. Now, mind the fact that he does this because he maybe thinks it's great to have his older brother there with him, and I'm always so enamored that he lets me do that. But I, by the way, did not practice 1 second to get this band. He did all the work. He's the one that stays up late and writes the music and plays the instruments and flies all over the world to try to grow an understanding and a brand and make money. And I just come along with some friends, and he reaches out and says, hey, become like me. Bam, put it right on your arm, and now I'm an artist. I'm important. To that crew that's there, you know, when you walk around with an artist band, everybody's looking at you. I wonder what band he's in. I wonder what he's doing. How much is he making? It's fun for the moment to revel in that. But it's not lost on me that, similarly, when we see Jesus, he puts a band on our arm that gives us access to everything. And we didn't do anything to deserve it. In fact, we've done things to not deserve it, but he doesn't care. His death on the cross, the breaking of his body, allows me entrance into high, high places. So today, when we take this bread, we do so with the one who gives us access, who loves us and wants to engage us in dialogue and discourse. Let's partake. In a similar manner, and many other occasions, Jesus would pull out then the cup, fill it with wine, hand it out to those at the table. And he would say, let's talk about this. Let's have a discourse about this. This cup, it represents my blood. One sacrifice for all. that you would not have to. This represents me laying my life down for you. Greater love has nothing more than that. My blood will be spilled so that yours doesn't have to be. Which is what makes things like when Sarah talks about Afghanistan so sad, because it doesn't have to be. Because Jesus did that already. He's paid the price that we might walk in freedom, that we might live again. So, let us enter the discourse of the blood that was shed for us.